Is it actually possible for a place to be cursed? Not cursed in some vague, throwaway metaphorical sense, but cursed in the sense that year after year, decade after decade, in completely unrelated crashes with completely unrelated causes, it keeps finding new ways to take lives from people who had absolutely nothing to do with whatever happened there before them? A speedway said to sit on land where a Native American chief was thrown from his horse and killed centuries before a single car ever turned a wheel on it. A single French afternoon where one crash claimed more lives than almost any other civilian disaster of its era. A 37-mile stretch of public road that has swallowed more than 260 riders since before the First World War even began, and one single race run over 3 impossible days that somehow managed to kill 3 completely different people before it had even finished. These are 4 of the most cursed races and racetracks in motorsport history, spanning open-wheel ovals, endurance circuits, and public mountain roads. And by the time you reach the last one, you may genuinely start to wonder if some places really do remember what happened on them and quietly wait for the next opportunity to do it again. Stay with this one all the way through, because the final story involves a race so disastrous that even the drivers who survived it still refuse to talk about it 5 decades later. Let's start with the track that wears its curse, almost like a badge of pride. Talladega Superspeedway in Alabama is the longest, fastest oval in NASCAR, and almost from the very moment it opened its gates in 1969, strange things began attaching themselves to its name. According to local legend, the land the track sits on once belonged to the Creek Nation, and depending on which version of the story you happen to hear, either a tribal shaman cursed the entire valley after the land was forcibly seized, or the speedway was built directly on top of a sacred burial ground, or a Native American chief was thrown from his horse and killed in that exact valley long before anyone ever poured a single drop of asphalt there. Track officials have always dismissed it publicly as nothing more than colorful folklore. The racing that has actually happened there since 1969 has made that folklore very difficult for anyone to laugh off completely. In 1973, 3-time NASCAR champion Bobby Isaac was leading laps comfortably at Talladega when he suddenly radioed his crew, pulled his car into the pits mid-race for no mechanical reason at all, climbed out, and simply quit the sport on the spot, later telling people close to him that a voice inside his own head had ordered him, without warning, to stop the car immediately. 2 decades later, in 1993, NASCAR legend Bobby Allison lost his own son, rising star Davey Allison, when a helicopter Davey was piloting crashed while attempting to land inside Talladega's infield, killing him almost instantly. And the track's reputation for violent, catch-fence-tearing crashes has never really gone away in the decades since. In April of 2009, driver Carl Edwards was sent airborne directly into the catch fence just short of the finish line, his car ripping a section of the fencing apart and showering the front rows of the grandstand with debris, injuring several spectators who had come only to watch the checkered flag fall. It happened again on the exact same stretch of fence years later, as if the track had simply chosen a favorite place to strike. By 2009, the superstition surrounding the track had grown so persistent and so widely believed among fans and drivers alike that track president Rick Humphrey personally brought in a Creek medicine man to perform an official Native American balancing ceremony right on the start-finish line, publicly asking on the record for the land itself to be at peace. Whether or not you believe a curse can genuinely live inside a stretch of asphalt, Talladega has spent more than half a century proving that something about that particular valley refuses to stay calm for very long. But if a single track cursed only by folklore can claim that many strange and violent moments across 5 decades, what does an entire afternoon look like when everything goes catastrophically wrong all at once, in front of 250,000 people who came only to watch a car race? On the 11th of June, 1955, the answer arrived at the Circuit de la Sarthe in France, during the 24 hours of Le Mans, in what remains to this very day the single deadliest disaster in the entire history of motorsport. Pierre Levey, a 49-year-old French driver racing for the factory Mercedes-Benz team, was pushing hard behind the leading Jaguar of Mike Hawthorne as the pack of cars approached the pit straight at full speed. Hawthorne braked suddenly and sharply to make a scheduled pit stop, catching the Austin Healey of fellow driver Lance Macklin completely off guard just ahead of him. Macklin swerved hard to avoid a collision, and directly behind him, Levey, with almost no time and almost no space left to react, clipped the rear of Macklin's car at somewhere around 150 miles per hour. Levay's Mercedes was launched violently into the air, soared clean over a low earthen embankment that was meant to separate the racing surface from the crowd, and disintegrated completely as it slammed directly into the packed grandstand at full speed. The car's hood sliced through the front rows of tightly packed spectators like a blade, killing more than a dozen people in that instant alone, while its engine block and front axle tore through the rest of the crowd like shrapnel from an artillery shell, cutting a path of destruction, dozens of meters wide in the space of a single second. Then came the fire. The Mercedes bodywork had been built from a lightweight magnesium alloy, and as the wreckage burned, it ignited into blinding white flames so intensely hot that rescue workers, completely unaware of how a magnesium fire actually behaves, poured water directly onto it and only made the inferno far worse, keeping the wreckage burning for hours afterward. When the final count was finally taken, Pierre Levay and 83 spectators were dead, with well over 100 more seriously injured, a human toll higher than any other single accident in the entire history of the sport, before or since. And in one of the most controversial decisions in motorsport history, race officials chose to let the 24-hour event continue running through the night regardless, reasoning that stopping it outright and sending the remaining 250,000 spectators home all at once would block the exact ambulance routes that the injured desperately needed to survive. Mercedes-Benz withdrew from motorsport entirely for more than 3 decades afterward. Several European nations banned circuit racing outright in the aftermath, and Switzerland did not lift its own ban for almost 70 years. One single afternoon, one broken second of misjudged braking, and a scar that the entire sport of motor racing carried with it for the rest of the century. Now, if one single afternoon can leave a scar that deep on an entire sport, imagine for a moment what happens when a race does not just go catastrophically wrong once, but keeps going wrong, year after year after year, for more than a century, on the exact same stretch of unforgiving road. That race is the Isle of Man Tourist Trophy, and it holds a title that no other motorsport event on the planet actually wants to hold. Since racing first began on its punishing 37-mile mountain course back in 1911, more than 260 competitors have lost their lives on its narrow, unforgiving public roads, an average of well over 1 death for every single running of the event across more than 100 years, a statistic so grim that no other regularly held motorsport event on the planet even comes close to matching it. To really understand why, you have to understand what the course actually is. It is not a purpose-built circuit with generous runoff areas and soft gravel traps waiting to catch a mistake. It is a genuine stretch of everyday public road, simply closed off for race week, that winds through small stone villages and open countryside, lined not with soft barriers, but with solid stone walls, telegraph poles, and the corners of people's actual houses, all while riders reach speeds beyond 200 miles per hour, with nothing but a leather suit, a visor, and pure muscle memory standing between them and the scenery flashing past. In 1970 alone, 6 riders died across a single fortnight of racing. In 2005, the single deadliest year in the event's long history, 11 people lost their lives between the TT itself and its sister event, the Manx Grand Prix, a toll that included riders, a course marshal, and even a bystander who never intended to be part of the danger at all. Simply someone standing in the wrong place along a public road that had briefly become a racetrack. As recently as 2022, 5 competitors were killed within the space of just 2 weeks. Among them, a father and son sidecar pairing who died at the very same corner of the course, along with a French sidecar passenger and 2 solo riders competing in completely separate classes, a run of losses so concentrated that it prompted the sport's own former champions to publicly call the death toll completely unacceptable, even while still defending the race's right to exist exactly as it always has. The event lost its world championship status back in the 1970s after top riders, led by multiple world champion Giacomo Agostini, refused to ever return to the course following the death of a close friend. And yet the Isle of Man TT has never once stopped running since 1907, and riders have never once stopped signing up to compete on it. Every single year, a new generation of competitors climbs onto the exact same stone-walled roads that have already claimed more than 260 lives before them, chasing the same unbroken title as the most dangerous race left standing anywhere on the planet. By now, you might think nothing could possibly top a race that has been quietly killing people for more than 100 consecutive years. But this final story is not about a place with a long, slow-building body count spread across generations. It is about one single race, over one single weekend, that somehow managed to take 3 separate lives before the checkered flag had even fallen. And it remains to this day the single darkest weekend in the entire history of the Indianapolis 500. The 1973 Indianapolis 500 was supposed to run on a straightforward Memorial Day in front of a crowd of roughly 300,000 people, the largest single-day audience in American sports, but absolutely nothing about that race went the way it was supposed to. Before the race had even started, during time trials for pole position earlier that month, veteran driver Art Pollard lost control of his car at over 190 miles per hour, struck the outside wall hard, burst instantly into flames, and was killed on the spot, the very first of what would become 3 deaths that same month. When the race itself finally got underway after an already frustrating 4-hour rain delay, disaster struck again within seconds of the green flag dropping. A multi-car collision on the very first lap sent driver Salt Walther's car cartwheeling directly into the outside catch fence, where it disintegrated completely and sprayed burning fuel straight into the packed grandstands, injuring more than a dozen spectators and leaving Walther himself with severe, life-altering burns that he barely survived. The race was immediately red-flagged, then postponed by rain for 2 more agonizing full days, leaving both fans and drivers trapped in a slow, dreadful limbo, no longer sure they even wanted the race to restart at all. When it finally resumed 2 days later on a Wednesday afternoon, disaster struck a third and final time, on lap 57. Driver Swede Savage lost control coming out of turn 4 and struck the inside wall almost completely head-on, an impact so violent it physically tore his car in half and triggered a fireball so massive it convinced everyone watching, fellow drivers included, that there was simply no possible way he could still be alive inside it. In the chaos and panic that followed, 22-year-old crew member Armando Terran ran across pit lane trying to help his stricken teammate, running directly into the path of a rescue truck speeding the wrong way toward the wreck at nearly 60 miles per hour. Terran was struck from behind and thrown roughly 50 feet through the air, dying from his injuries within the hour, in full view of the grandstands and the Indianapolis 500 Festival Queen seated in the tower just above him. Swede Savage did not die that day either, clinging to life in a hospital bed for another 33 agonizing days before he finally succumbed to his injuries in early July. 3 men connected to a single race, dead within the span of a single month, and a 4th man left permanently scarred by burns and a lifelong struggle that followed him for the rest of his days. Drivers who lived through that one weekend still call it, 5 decades later, the single race from their entire careers that they most wish they could simply forget ever happened. 4 places, 4 completely different decades, disciplines and continents, an oval built over a valley of old folklore in Alabama, a French endurance circuit that hosted the single deadliest afternoon the sport has ever witnessed, a public road cutting through the middle of the Irish Sea that has quietly claimed lives for well over 100 consecutive years, and one single American race weekend that somehow found 3 completely different ways to kill in the space of a single month. Whether or not you personally believe a place can truly be cursed, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore across every single story on this list. The tragedy was never really about bad luck striking at random. It was always about speed meeting a moment of exposure, a marshal standing too close to the racing line, a barrier built too low, a stone wall sitting too near the road, a runoff area too short. Again and again, in different decades, in different countries, in completely different machines. So here's the question worth carrying with you, long after this video ends. If the exact same handful of mistakes, a marshal too close, a barrier too low, a wall too near, a runoff too short, can echo across 100 years and 4 completely different corners of the world, is it really the places themselves that are cursed, or is it simply the sport generation after generation, quietly refusing to fully learn the one lesson it keeps almost, but never quite learning? And if that is true, which track, which corner, which valley is quietly waiting its turn next?